In 1960, the US government monitored the events occurring in Cuba under the rule of Fulgencio Batista. Little did they know that on January 1st, 1961, Fidel Castro would take over as the ruler of Cuba. This change in power created fear for the current president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He believed that under this new leadership, an alliance would form between Cuba and the Soviet Union. This is when Eisenhower would hire Richard M. Bazell Jr. of the CIA to form a plan to rid Cuba of Castro. This plan wasn't complete until the next president, John F. Kennedy, would step onto power on January 20th, 1961. Once the plan was complete, 3 months later, JFK would start the chain of events leading up to the Bay of Pigs. The plan was simple. The US would send a group of bomber planes to attack the southern coast of Cuba. This would create confusion and chaos in the Cuban government. Then, the soldiers would fight their way to Castro, where they would force him out of office. Before they could start the plan, they had to recruit soldiers. Here's an interview from Benito Garcia, one of the recruiters.
To mix in with the Cubans and find out what they wanted to do. And if they did, send them to the Dutch.
Once recruited, the members of Brigade 2506 would go through a set of physical exams to make sure they were eligible and healthy enough to take part of the plan and training. Once they cleared all their physicals and other exams, they were sent to train and prepare. The U.S. would train them by strengthening their muscles and their mind. They would also be given and trained on how to use weapons like knives and guns they were given. After that training was complete, they would then go to Mexico to receive even more military training in arms. The U.S. also gave them a group of trained mercenaries to aid in the battle and clear a path. The one thing they didn't account for was the recruiters accidentally revealing the plan and their mission to recruit soldiers. On April 17, 1961, all the preparations were complete, and the plan was set in motion. 1,200 Cuban exiles landed on Cuban soil, each bearing arms, and the goal? To free their country from Castro's regime. Once on land, the members of Brigade 2506 were greeted with a loss of hope, because the Cuban military was already there. This is when they realized that the plane sent to create a distraction and hit the Cubans' military airfield never hit their target. This is because, in anticipation, the Cubans had set up anti-aircraft guns to defend the shoreline from any attacks. The Cubans and the brigade then engaged in a battle that ultimately ended with the brigade being outnumbered. From there, the Cubans would take what was left of the brigade prisoner. They would also confiscate the weapons and supplies of the brigade. The prisoners were then escorted to Cuba in a line by the Cuban military. They ended up being held hostage, and Castro would negotiate the terms of their release. In the end, the remaining members of the invasion were released 20 months later, in exchange for $53 million worth of baby food and medicine. It is estimated that a total of 100 or more members were killed. 4 of these were the pilots leading the invasion, all of which died in combat. In honor of all the men and women who died fighting for Cuba, a memorial was created to honor them and their legacy for many years to come. Following the events, JFK made a speech to the American Society of Newspaper Editors.
from the rebel commander when asked if he wished to be evacuated. His answer was, "I will never leave this country." That is not the reply of a mercenary. He has gone now to join in the mountains countless other guerrilla fighters who are equally determined that the dedication of those who gave their lives shall not be forgotten, and that Cuba must not be abandoned to the communists. And we do not intend to abandon it either. The Cuban people have not yet spoken their final piece, and I have no doubt that they and the Revolutionary Council, led by Dr. Cardona, and members of the families of the Revolutionary Council, I am informed by the doctor yesterday, are involved themselves in the islands, will continue to speak up for a free and independent Cuba.
In the end, we learned that sometimes a plan just doesn't work out, and that you just have to take what you learned from that experience to not make the same mistake again. We can also learn that if you have an idea, you need to work hard to make sure there aren't any gaps or flaws. In the end, the Bay of Pigs invasion was doomed to fail due to poor planning, bad management, and horrible execution.